Hello everyone, my name's Darren and I'll be talking to you today about achieving a sustainable aviation industry. Will technology save the day? And I'd like to just point out, because we're in an industry that's changing very rapidly at the moment, this is being delivered on Friday the 7th of August 2020. So just to quickly introduce myself, I moved to the UK in the middle of August 2018. And I'm a lecturer in air transport management at Cranfield University. I'm originally from Melbourne, Australia, and my focus area is geopolitics of aviation, but I also have a strong interest in the environment, aviation and the environment, and the government responses and the technological responses to all the environmental issues that the industry is facing at the moment. Just to give you a quick idea of where I actually am right now at the moment, I'm in the security building. You can see on this red arrow on campus. You'll notice though with the map here that we have Cranfield Airport. We're the only university in the UK to have an operational airfield. And for those who may not know where Cranfield is, if you take a look at a larger map of the UK, we're about 50 miles or about 80 kilometres northwest of London. And I should point out, sorry, that we are an all postgraduate university. So a quick overview of what I'd like to talk to you about in the next 35 or 40 minutes. I'd like to look at environmental issues and concerns as they relate to aviation. I do want to mention as a starting point COVID-19. I don't think we can really talk about any topic in aviation at the moment without mentioning COVID-19. Look at some of the technological solutions that are available. Biofuels being one option, fuel efficiency another. I'm going to look at electric powered flight towards the end of the presentation, and then a few ground considerations as well, because not everything is happening in the air when it comes to environmental concerns and responses. So just looking broadly to begin with, aviation and the environment. I should point out I do have a bit of a bias, which will probably come through in this presentation, in that I do think ultimately technology will come along to save the day, but I don't think we should just sit back and wait for that to happen. I think there are a lot of proactive things we can do. And in that spirit, I think the industry needs to be seen to be doing something. So we can't just sit back and say, guys, don't worry. Technology is going to ultimately get us through. Science is going to find a way. Just wait, just be patient, it's coming. No, we need to be seen to be proactive. We need to be seen to be doing something and doing something now. And in that spirit, marketing can only do so much. So we need to be careful as an industry not to try to spin our way out of this topic or to try to make a whole series of marketing arguments alone. Marketing has a place, but we need to be careful not to rely on it too much. At the same time, passengers. We can only expect passengers to do so much, whether it's carbon offsetting or other policies or practices, paying higher taxes. Whatever the case is, we need to be careful not to put all the onus on passengers either. Politics, on the other hand, can do a lot, and I'll come back to that topic at various points throughout the presentation today. And science, yes, it can do a great deal. Like I said, I admit upfront my bias that science has a big role to play here. But I guess the question that comes up and will come throughout this presentation, this workshop today, is really, are we putting too much faith in science to deliver technological solutions to the big challenges that we face in terms of aviation and the environment? Now let's start with COVID-19. As I said, we need to acknowledge the biggest issue in aviation today and no doubt for a long time to come. I like to think of aviation and the environment as being like the response to COVID-19. We can have that individual response, or if you like, if we look at aviation, the passenger level response. So we can wash our hands, we can socially distance, we can wear a mask. Government can play a big role in helping us get through the current pandemic, as it can play a big role in helping the industry respond to the challenge, the environmental challenges that it faces. So government, when it comes to COVID-19, can deploy lockdowns, restrict border access, track and trace. And technology, well, in a COVID-19 context, technology can provide therapeutics, medicines that can help alleviate the symptoms, and it can create a vaccine. So when we think about this in a systemic or holistic way, again, we start to realize that as we move down through this list, there's a big role for governments, and ultimately, if we're going to come out of this pandemic in a very significant way, it's technology that's going to play a very big role. Now, earlier in the year, before the pandemic brought about lockdowns around Europe and the world, and included here in the UK, we actually held an aviation forum here at Cranfield University, and we asked a number of questions around sustainability. And I just thought it was interesting here, if we look at 53 responses from participants who attended this forum, we asked them about whether the aviation industry will be carbon neutral by 2050. And on a 6-point scale here, we can see strongly disagree on my side here, and then to my left, strongly agree. Now, in terms of the industry being carbon neutral by 2050, there was not a lot of agreement there, but technology being the main driver to bring about a sustainable industry was a lot stronger, and then a little weaker there, but certainly just above neutral. Passengers need to take action to address emissions in aviation. So if we look at the probability of something happening by the middle of the century, not a lot of optimism, but if we look at technology's role, a lot more optimism. And again, passengers need to take individual action, need to take responsibility, but we can't put all the pressure on them as an industry. The government and the industry need to also take a big role here. So at this forum in February, we also asked participants, and again, 53 of them responded, who is actually responsible to make aviation more sustainable? And again, we see in first place governments, airlines and airports, that is the industry, have a big role. Aircraft manufacturers not far behind in third, and in distant fourth there, passengers. So again, it's governments and the industry that have a big role to play here. And as we saw earlier, technology getting the biggest response there as well as a way forward. So I'd just like to point out that there is a 3-minute video that Cranfield University recently produced looking at aviation and the environment. They talk about some of the research that's going on here at the university, including hydrogen propulsion, hydrogen fuel. So if you'd like to take a look in your own time at the video with the hyperlink there, I would recommend that you take a look at some of the research that's going on right now at the moment here at Cranfield University. And some of these issues I'll touch on in this presentation. So I think it is important that we realise that technology has come through before for the industry. Planes now fly further than ever before. And in fact, if we look at one of the Wright brothers, who just 5 years after that historic first heavier-than-air flight in Kitty Hawk in the US, Orville Wright, who confidently predicted in 1908 that no aircraft would ever be able to fly non-stop from New York to Paris because there is no engine that would be able to run 4 days constantly and make that journey. Interestingly enough, just over a decade later in 1919, 2 British aviators took just under 17 hours to cross the North Atlantic in the first ever non-stop transatlantic flight. And as many of you will know and have likely experienced yourselves, today commercial airlines actually cross the North Atlantic in about 7 hours. And in fact, with favourable tailwinds and with the help of the jet stream, aircraft have been able to make that crossing in a lot less. And the Concorde, in fact, regularly crossed the North Atlantic in about 3 hours or so. So technology has certainly demonstrated throughout the history of the industry that it does come through. It is able to help the industry progress and move forward. And also technology, we must understand, has helped other industries and has helped elsewhere. So for example, in the 1970s, there were lots of scientists that were saying, based on the current food production in the world and the world's population growth, there was simply not going to be enough food for people in the not too distant future. But along came the agricultural revolution, a whole lot of technological advances in agriculture, and food production has kept up with population growth. And in fact, we have had surpluses year on year. Now, an interesting one, we're talking about the environment and the need to reduce carbon emissions, but it is interesting to note that there is another theory as well about peak oil to do with the oil industry. Well, technology has come along with fracking, and particularly in the US, and this new technology has allowed oil to be extracted in ways that were not thought possible just a few years ago, and this has meant that a lot of debate and talk around peak oil has shifted or decreased recently as technology has come along to demonstrate there will be enough carbon fuels, particularly oil, well into the future. The debate really is about reducing the use of these fuels, really not about whether we're going to run out of oil. So as an industry then, if we then move back to aviation, we can see that there are moves towards trying to strategically focus on the environment and on ways to reduce the emissions of the industry. And really this workshop today is all about the first strategic goal that IATA has set out, which is investing in new technology. So can technology come through to save the day for the industry? Just quickly, IATA's Teresa program, the technology roadmap for environmentally sustainable aviation, although initially developed in 2013, this program is all about trying to retrofit aircraft, upgrade aircraft, new aircraft designs, etc., to try and harness technology to improve the efficiency and ultimately reduce the emissions of the industry overall. And again, there's a link to that report there and the updates to that report since that you may wish to take a look at. Now, one area that's often spoken about are biofuels. They are up to 80% less polluting than current jet fuel. Although early on in their development, there was a lot of debate around using crops. So it was starting to impact food production, and there was actually global increases in food prices not that long ago. But now there's much more focus on using waste products, including used cooking oil. There's talk about using marine biofuels like seaweed. And there are lots of other different plants and waste products that are now being spoken about and looked at that do not compete with crops. Currently, biofuels are more expensive than jet fuel, but supporters do point to the fact that they are progressively falling in price. There is a video here from Boeing, which I would recommend you take a look at in your own time. Biofuels are championed by a lot of people because they can use the existing infrastructure of the industry, the pipes, the tankers, the refuelers, etc. They don't need a huge infrastructure investment in terms of delivery of the fuel. The systems are there. It's all about producing, storing, and finding the best source to make the fuel in the first place. Okay, typically in a workshop like this, I have an audience face-to-face, and then we have a discussion. But I would like you to think about this discussion point and consider your views on these questions. So in terms of biofuels, what is holding up, in your opinion, what's holding up the development of these biofuels at the moment? And the second question I'd like you to consider is it realistic to imagine an aviation world where all the jet fuel is biofuel? So if we think about our own vehicles where there might be a 5, 10 or even 20% mandate to use various fuels like ethanol, for example, It doesn't seem, other than in some particular countries like Brazil where you can get 100% alcohol for your vehicle, it doesn't seem that we've moved with our vehicles towards 100% in most countries, but we do have percentages. So in aviation, are we looking at percentages of fuel, or do you think it's realistic that one day we could imagine an entire industry running on biofuel? Now, John Defterios from CNN has discussed the topic of biofuels, and I've left a link here if you'd like to watch a video from CNN, just taking a look at a range of different startup companies that are trying to tackle this issue of producing biofuel. So one area that has received a lot of attention recently is electric aircraft. There's a lot of discussion, there's a lot of research, a lot of interest in electric aircraft. In many ways, this is not surprising given what's happening with electric vehicles, particularly cars, and we can all think of Tesla as the big example there. But even big supporters do point out that we're probably looking at the middle of the century, 2050 and beyond, before they become a commercial reality. And that commercial reality is likely to unfold in stages, with short and regional flights likely to experience electrification first, aircraft of 50 seats or so, whereas the longer routes, those long-haul routes, intercontinental routes with several hundred passengers on board, along with cargo and heavier payloads as a result, these are not likely to see a full electrification anytime soon. One area that is of concern are batteries. That is the weight versus the energy, and they remain a major technological hurdle. Surrounding the concept of batteries, we also need to acknowledge what some skeptics or those that are less optimistic about this topic point out. They ask the question, and the important question, where does the electricity come from to recharge the battery? So electrical generation at source is an important point. Others have pointed out that the manufacturing process and the disposal process of batteries is are also important areas that need to be considered and acknowledged if we're to have a full understanding of the challenges and the technological possibilities of battery power. So there's a lot happening with electric aircraft at the moment, but we do need to understand that this is going to take quite a considerable amount of time before the wider industry is significantly impacted. Although with a lot of short-haul routes in Europe and the domestic air market in the US, for example, there is certainly an argument to be made that it has a very significant role in the not too distant future to play, particularly on those shorter routes. So again, in a workshop where there is an audience here face-to-face, I would ask you to turn to the person next to you and discuss the likelihood of electric planes becoming a reality within the next 10 years or so. So I'd like you to think about that topic. Think about, are we thinking about commercial aircraft being available in the next decade? And again, what type of commercial aircraft? Are they the smaller single-aisle planes, regional aircraft? And how long might it be before we're looking at the wide bodies, the longer haul aircraft? Now, another very important topic and a very important approach for the industry in looking at helping to reduce emissions is fuel efficiency. Newer aircraft, so aircraft manufacturers can come along and manufacture the 787 or Airbus with the A350 and achieve a 20 to 25% fuel burn decrease. However, we must remember that there is projected to be, and these projections were made prior to COVID-19, but certainly there is evidence to suggest that in 3 to 5 years, as the COVID pandemic is overcome, we could be heading back towards the growth predictions prior to the pandemic, which were that there's going to be a 50% increase in the global fleet in the coming decades. And so this means if you compare these two numbers, and don't take into consideration a whole range of other factors which we really should take into consideration. But with these two metrics alone, fuel burn decrease, but a global fleet increase, we see that total emissions still are more than what they are today. So reductions are still worth pursuing. I don't want to give the impression they're not worth pursuing. There's a lot being achieved in aircraft efficiency at the moment, but on their own, they're not going to solve the industry-wide problem. Another design feature which can also be retrofitted to aircraft, to current aircraft in the fleet, are winglets and winglet design. They're also called sharklets. Again, they help to increase efficiency by harnessing the airflow and the lift. And there's a very good article if you'd like to take a look if you're interested in the topic by Aviation Week, and I have a link there in which it goes through all the various shapes, sizes and designs of these winglets and how different airlines are using them and different aircraft types are using them to help give a 3 to 5% improvement in efficiency. So a reduction in fuel burn of around 3 to 5%. And again, these can be retrofitted to an existing aircraft. We mustn't forget engine design and manufacturers as well. Commercial jet engines are becoming a lot quieter and more efficient. We are seeing fan blades becoming lighter, which is adding to that increased efficiency. Also, airlines are involved now in programs of regular cleaning and maintenance to reduce emissions. So research has discovered that if aircraft engines are regularly cleaned, they perform a lot better and therefore use less jet fuel. And there are also new gear systems that are being designed and implemented that improve the performance of the engines and again flow through to lower emissions as a result. There is a little case study video here that if you'd like to watch in your own time about the Trent 1000 jet engine from Royce. An interesting visual on helping you to understand some of the new technologies that are going into commercial jet engines at the moment. I would like to point out, however, that it's not all happening in the air. There are a lot of things happening on the ground. Airports are getting heavily involved in trying to become more sustainable. Of course, one of the debates that comes out of this is that if airports are able to claim their carbon neutral status, are they abandoning airlines in the process and leaving airlines to defend themselves? And again, I would make the argument, as many others do, that airlines and airports need to work closely together in a close relationship to tackle this issue of environmental concerns, of emissions, industry emissions, together to create a holistic solution, and simply breaking airports away from airlines and letting each defend themselves doesn't really go to the spirit of a combined industry taking this big issue on head-on together. But there are certainly lots of airports that are pushing their environmental sustainability credentials. But again, are we disconnecting the green airport from the wider aviation value chain? And there's lots going on in terms of electric buses and ground handling vehicles. But again, there are issues around having the infrastructure in place to recharge these vehicles. And it's not simply just a case of swapping over your fleet of ground vehicles from petrol or diesel to electric. You need to think about charging stations and making sure those vehicles are available when they're needed. Recycling and waste disposal are also big issues that are being looked at via airports. So there's a lot happening here in terms of what's going on the ground and what's going on at airports all around the world. I guess the big challenge is that concerns a lot of people is, are we seeing a disconnect developing between airlines and airports? Because again, we need to take a holistic view of aviation and the environment and understand that all parts of the value chain need to work together if we're to address the important issues that need to be addressed. Now, there is one example here of electric airport buses at Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. There are localized benefits, of course, quieter, cleaner air. It's also a great marketing tool for the airport. If you watch the video, you can get a good sense of that as well. But global impacts, well, the argument from supporters is it's a powerful demonstration model. It's something that other airports can strive towards. They can see a roadmap of how to improve their ground operations and how to electrify the ground fleet. Everything in life, well, I should say most things in life start with a small start, and there's a growing impact over time as people become aware of what you're doing, and this could be just one such example. It may only be something that's happening at a few airports around the world, but more airports will catch on over time. And again, we need to think of a system-wide approach, but again, if we start small, it doesn't take that long for the rest of the system to start to notice that there is a way forward. So it is a great model of what can be done. So what about growing pains in the industry as the industry comes out of COVID-19 and perhaps returns to 2019 levels and then goes beyond those levels? Well, it's growing, again, pre-COVID-19, but we could imagine in 3 to 5 years from now, we're going to see that growth return to emerging air markets in Africa, Asia, and Latin America in particular. So if we consider biofuels again, if they become competitively priced compared to fossil fuels, as some claim is going to happen in the not too distant future, then maybe a major cost for airlines, which is up to 1/3 of their costs, could actually be reduced over time, with the added major benefit of also bringing down CO2 emissions as well. So maybe we'll get to a tipping point where biofuels will actually play those two important roles of reducing costs and reducing emissions. If you like that traditional expression, a win-win for everyone. Like I said, technology has saved agriculture and interestingly, the oil industry, as I said as well. An interesting case study given what we're talking about. But I guess the question we're thinking about is, can it also save aviation in terms of emission reductions? Can technology come to the table and help to get those emissions down to levels that can see a sustainable industry heading well into the future? Well, technology is expected to deliver a significant proportion of the industry's future reductions. Like I said at the start, I start this workshop with a degree of bias because I do think that technology has a very important role to play, as it does in the current COVID-19 pandemic, as I pointed out earlier. I think technology needs to be understood as something that operates across all levels, whether it's at our personal level, individual level, that is the passenger, whether it's governments, or whether it's a whole range of different policies and practices and new inventions and experimentation. We need to take a holistic, whole of industry view and understand that technology is not a magical solution so much as something that impacts across the entire the aviation value chain. So what are some final thoughts then? Again, we need to take a system-wide approach, and it is a little bit concerning that airlines and airports are starting to develop different messaging, with airports being able to claim carbon neutrality when airlines obviously find that a lot more difficult to claim and to achieve. So that gap that's developing in some ways between airlines and airports should be a warning to the whole industry that we need to be working together in a very strategic and holistic way, not breaking off into our various areas of the value chain and focusing only on our core business, but understanding the entire global business. It's also important to think about the problem. The problem are carbon emissions. It's not aviation. So if you watch that earlier video that I first spoke about that Cranfield University has recently developed, the point is made that we need to understand that the problem are the emissions, not the industry, not aviation. Governments need to be careful not to back a specific technology. They need instead to fund research and development. So governments really shouldn't be in the game of trying to pick the technology they think is going to work in future, but get the money out there into research and development across a range of different technologies so that, to use the same analogy as COVID-19 with the vaccine, with over 100 in development at the moment, so that there's the best chance of finding the technologies that are going to be the most successful, the most impactful, giving it the best shot by having as many competitors in the field as possible. And I always like to remind myself that the industry that invented heavier than air flight can also ensure that that same air is less polluted in future. It's an amazing industry. There's a lot of technology. Technology has, since the very beginning, played a very important role in the industry. And I think the argument can be made, and certainly I'd like to make it today, that technology still has a really important role to play in ensuring that we have a sustainable industry going into the future. So like I said, technology can save the day, but I also have to acknowledge it needs to do it sooner rather than later. So really the challenge is a timescale challenge. It's not so much a technological challenge. Technology will ultimately come through, but we need it to come through sooner rather than later. So to go back to the original COVID-19 analogy, it's quite similar. We know technology will find a way through the pandemic, but if it can find a way through sooner, we can have economies that are far more sustainable, people who are not out of employment for long periods of time, for example. And in the same way as with aviation and the environment, it's a timescale issue. So I think the issue is not so much technology, it's can we get technology fast enough to have the impacts we need now and not too far into the future that the industry ultimately struggles to become sustainable. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time. And I do hope that we all get to meet face to face at some point in the not too distant future. So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to hopefully meeting you at some point in the future.